the great honor of addressing this joint, a meeting of Congress, and on behalf of the Queen and myself, to thank the American people for welcoming us to the United States. For decades, world leaders have stood before Congress and delivered carefully measured words, but when King Charles stepped onto that historic stage, something felt profoundly different. The room fell silent, the cameras locked in, and even seasoned politicians appeared, unsettled by the weight of what was coming. What began as a ceremonial address quickly turned into a speech. Many are now calling one of the most consequential royal moments in modern history. But what exactly did the king say that sparked global debate, stunned allies, and left millions wondering whether the world had just changed forever? So what do you think was King Charles's speech that transformative? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover the latest royal drama, please subscribe. Seeds of Revolution. The struggle between the American colonies and the British monarchy was not caused by a single event or one sudden disagreement. It was a slow, burning conflict that grew stronger over many years, fueled by frustration, distrust, economic hardship, and a deep feeling that the colonies were no longer being treated fairly. By the middle of the 18th century, many Americans had begun to believe that the British crown was no longer protecting their freedoms. Instead, they felt that the monarchy was using its authority to dominate, control, and profit from them. One of the biggest causes of anger was the issue of taxation without representation. After Britain spent enormous amounts of money fighting the French and Indian War, the government looked for ways to recover its losses. The colonies became an easy target. New taxes were introduced through laws such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, forcing colonists to pay extra money on everyday goods and official documents. What made the situation even worse was that the colonists had no elected representatives in the British Parliament. To many Americans, this felt deeply unjust. They argued that no government should force people to pay taxes when those people had no voice in making the laws. Soon the phrase taxation without representation became a powerful slogan that united angry colonists across the land. Economic restrictions added even more tension. Through laws like the Navigation Acts, Britain tightly controlled colonial trade and made sure that the colonies mainly benefited the British economy. American merchants were limited in who they could trade with, what goods they could produce, and how profits were shared. Many colonists believed these rules crushed their economic freedom and kept them dependent on the crown. The growing military presence in the colonies also increased fear and resentment. British soldiers were stationed in towns and cities, creating the feeling that the people were constantly being watched and controlled. Under the Quartering Act, colonists were sometimes required to provide housing, food, and supplies for the troops. This only deepened public anger. Violent incidents, especially the Boston Massacre, shocked the colonies and strengthened the belief that Britain ruled through fear and force rather than respect and cooperation. The conflict reached a dangerous turning point in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party. Furious over the Tea Act, colonists dumped large amounts of British tea into Boston Harbor as an act of protest. Britain reacted harshly, introducing severe punishments known as the Intolerable Acts. Instead of calming the situation, these actions convinced many Americans that the monarchy had become oppressive and tyrannical. Over time, the conflict grew into something far greater than disagreements over taxes or trade. It became a powerful struggle for liberty, self-rule, and freedom from royal control. More and more colonists came to see King George III as a symbol of oppression rather than protection. That growing belief would eventually push the colonies toward revolution, independence, and the birth of a new nation. Although things have really improved between the two countries, how was King Charles's presence perceived by the Americans? Let's delve into the details of the royal entrance that captured America's attention. An extraordinary alliance. The chamber of the United States Congress had rarely carried this level of tension, excitement, and expectation all at once. Even before the ceremony officially started, something unusual could already be felt in the air. The historic hall buzzed with quiet conversations as senators, representatives, diplomats, military officials, and honored guests exchanged whispers and curious glances. Bright camera flashes lit up the room from every angle, while journalists hurried to capture every second of the unfolding event. Everyone understood they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered for generations. Then, suddenly, the announcement came. Mr. Speaker, Their Majesties King Charles III and Queen Camilla. In an instant, the entire chamber erupted into powerful applause. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder, filling every corner of the historic building. Many rose to their feet as King Charles III entered, alongside Queen Camilla with calm elegance and royal composure. At that moment, the gathering no longer felt like an ordinary diplomatic visit between two friendly nations. The atmosphere became far more meaningful than politics or ceremony. It represented centuries of complicated history, times of war and peace, division and unity, sacrifice and partnership. It was a powerful reminder of how two nations, once separated by revolution, had grown into some of the closest allies in the modern world. For millions watching from different parts of the globe, this was not simply another royal speech. It felt like a defining chapter in the long and emotional relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. King Charles stood before Congress with quiet confidence. His posture reflected the dignity expected of a monarch, yet there was also warmth in his face and sincerity in his voice. He appeared both regal and approachable at the same time. So you can't be the same as the sovereign if you're the Prince of Wales or the heir. And the moment he began to speak, the mood inside the chamber shifted completely. He first thanked Congress for granting him the rare honor of addressing a joint meeting. Speaking on behalf of both himself and Queen Camilla, he expressed heartfelt appreciation to the American people for welcoming them during such a historic period. The celebration marking 250 years since the Declaration of Independence. From his very first sentences, the speech felt personal rather than formal. The king spoke about the deep connection between Britain and America, reminding listeners that the histories of both nations have remained closely linked for generations. Then, with perfect timing, he quoted the famous writer Oscar Wilde, joking that Britain and America now share almost everything in common except perhaps the language. The chamber instantly burst into laughter. The joke softened the seriousness of the occasion and revealed a more human side of the king. It reminded everyone listening that despite political differences, distance, and separate systems of government, the bond between both countries remains remarkably strong. But beneath the laughter was a deeper truth. Here stood a British monarch addressing the descendants of a revolution that once fought to break away from the crown itself. Yet, centuries later, both nations stood together not as enemies, but as trusted friends and powerful allies. History in that moment felt truly extraordinary. Was King Charles able to pass a serious message across? How did his audience feel about his blunt truth? Let's find out. A divided world. As the applause from the opening moments slowly faded, the atmosphere inside Congress began to change. What started as a warm and ceremonial address gradually transformed into something far deeper, heavier, and far more emotional. The room became quieter. Phase turned more serious. Every word spoken by King Charles suddenly seemed to carry greater meaning. The king acknowledged a painful reality that many people across the world already feel every day. The world is entering a time filled with uncertainty, fear, and growing instability. From parts of Europe to the troubled regions of the Middle East, wars continue to leave destruction behind. Cities have been damaged, families separated, and countless innocent lives changed forever. Many people now wake up each day unsure of what tomorrow may bring. He spoke not only about bombs and conflict, but also about the silent emotional suffering carried by ordinary people. Parents worry about protecting their children. Young people fear for their future. Entire communities struggle with rising prices, insecurity, displacement, and the exhausting pressure of living in a world that often feels divided and unpredictable. To bring down inflation to ease the cost of living for families. As he spoke, it became clear that King Charles was not simply delivering a royal speech. He sounded like a leader deeply concerned about the future of humanity itself. The tone grew even more powerful when he referred to the shocking violence that had recently taken place near the Capitol, an incident that deeply unsettled the United States and sent fear across the political world. Yet instead of using dramatic language, the king responded with calm strength and moral clarity. Acts of violence, he firmly declared, will never succeed. For a brief moment, the chamber seemed completely still. The words hung heavily in the air. At that point, the speech no longer felt like a traditional diplomatic appearance. It began to sound like a worldwide appeal for unity, stability, and responsibility. King Charles reminded lawmakers that disagreements are unavoidable in every democracy. Political opponents will always clash. Citizens will debate passionately. Nations will hold different views and interests. But he warned that when anger and division grow too strong, they can weaken the very democratic systems meant to protect freedom and justice inside Congress, a place built on argument, debate, and opposing opinions. That message struck deeply. The king went on to honor soldiers, police officers, emergency responders, and everyday citizens who courageously place themselves in danger to protect others. His central message became impossible to ignore. Freedom survives only when people reject hatred and choose unity instead. Again and again, he returned to one powerful theme: hope, even while speaking about fear, division, and instability. He urged nations to choose cooperation over isolation, understanding over suspicion, and peace over violence. By the end, many realized his speech was not just about Britain or America. It was a warning and a message for the entire modern world. Did King Charles refer to the historic feud between the two nations? What did he say about it? Let's dive into the details of the extraordinary journey of two nations from revolution to brotherhood. One of the most fascinating parts of the speech came when King Charles reflected on the long and complicated relationship between Britain and America. Standing inside Congress, he openly acknowledged the enormous historical weight surrounding the moment. The modern relationship between the two countries, he explained, stretches back far beyond 250 years. Its roots extend over 4 centuries. Then he made a striking observation. He noted that he is the 19th British sovereign to closely study the affairs of America. That statement reminded listeners that America was once deeply connected to Britain long before independence. King Charles then praised Congress itself. He described it as a citadel of democracy built to represent the voices, freedoms, and rights of ordinary Americans. Looking around the chamber, he reflected on the generations of lawmakers who shaped American history within those walls. At that moment, the speech became deeply emotional. The king remembered his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who addressed Congress in 1991. He spoke about her with visible respect and affection. For millions around the world, Queen Elizabeth symbolized continuity, stability, and endurance. Now, her son stood in the same chamber, continuing a relationship she spent decades strengthening. Yet, King Charles carefully avoided allowing the speech to become overly solemn. With perfect timing, he introduced humor once again. He explained that when British monarchs addressed Parliament at Westminster, an old tradition involves holding a member of Parliament at Buckingham Palace to guarantee the monarch's safe return. Then, smiling toward the speaker, he joked that guests at Buckingham Palace are treated so well these days that they often do not want to leave. The chamber erupted with laughter. The humor achieved something remarkable. It softened centuries of historical tension between monarchy and revolution. It transformed old conflict into shared amusement. King Charles then explored one of the most profound ideas in the entire speech: the fact that disagreement itself helped create the special relationship between Britain and America. He referred to the revolutionary slogan, "No taxation without representation." What once represented a fierce dispute between Britain and the American colonies, he explained, also reflected democratic principles inherited from British political traditions. In other words, the American Revolution did not completely reject British ideas. It carried many of them forward. The king described the partnership between the two nations as born out of dispute, but no less strong for it. That sentence perfectly captured the strange beauty of history. Former enemies became trusted allies. A revolution eventually produced one of the strongest international friendships in modern civilization. But what was King Charles's submission on democracy and freedom? Did he reflect what they stood for and believed in? Let's dig into the details of the roots of democracy and the legacy of freedom. Foundations of democracy. King Charles devoted a large portion of his speech to explaining the historical foundations that continue to connect Britain and America. According to him, the strength of the relationship between the two nations does not exist by accident. It was built over centuries through shared ideas about law, liberty, rights, and government. He praised the founding fathers of America as bold and imaginative revolutionaries who united 13 separate colonies into one nation built upon the revolutionary ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At the same time, he reminded this audience that many of those ideas emerged from older British traditions: English common law, the Enlightenment, Magna Carta, and Britain's Declaration of Rights all helped shape the democratic principles later embedded within the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. The king specifically mentioned Magna Carta signed in 1215, describing it as one of history's most important legal documents. Even today, he explained, the United States Supreme Court continues to reference Magna Carta in major legal decisions involving freedom, justice, and limitations on executive power. That historical connection fascinated many listeners. It showed that democracy is not created overnight. It develops slowly across generations. It grows through struggle, sacrifice, debate, and the continuous pursuit of justice. King Charles also spoke about the symbolic land near Runny where Magna Carta was signed centuries ago. Part of that historic site was later gifted to the United States in memory of President John F. Kennedy, symbolizing the shared commitment of both nations to liberty. The speech then shifted toward modern democracy. The king praised Congress as a living example of representative government. Unlike systems ruled by one individual, Congress represents millions of voices, cultures, beliefs, and communities. He described America as a living mosaic strengthened by diversity rather than weakened by it. That message carried enormous importance in today's political climate. Many societies across the world struggle with division, racial tension, social distrust, and political polarization. Yet, King Charles insisted that diversity and freedom remain among the greatest strengths of democratic nations. He acknowledged that both Britain and America continue to face painful social problems. However, he expressed hope that compassion, justice, and understanding can still overcome hatred and division. The speech became even more personal when he spoke about faith. King Charles described Christianity as a daily source of strength and guidance for many people in both nations, including himself. But rather than limiting his message to one religion, he emphasized the importance of interfaith understanding. Having spent decades promoting dialogue between religions, the king explained that he repeatedly witnessed how respect between different faith communities creates peace instead of conflict. His words carried deep sincerity. At a time when religious extremism and intolerance continued to threaten societies around the world, his appeal for mutual understanding felt both urgent and necessary. He prayed openly for a future where nations turned swords into plowshares instead of allowing violence to define humanity's future. How did King Charles describe the alliance between the two countries, especially during the Second World War? Was it a genuine acknowledgement? Let's talk about how King Charles admitted to standing shoulder to shoulder through war and uncertainty. Allies through history. As the speech continued, King Charles shifted his attention toward global security and international cooperation. He described the alliance between Britain and America as one of the most unique partnerships in modern history, quoting the late Henry Kissinger and referencing President John F. Kennedy's vision of an Atlantic partnership. The king argued that cooperation between Europe and America has never been more important than it is today. To explain the importance of that alliance, he looked back into history. He recalled the visit of his grandfather, King George V, to the United States in 1939. At that time, fascism was spreading rapidly across Europe, and the world stood dangerously close to another devastating war. Eventually, Britain and America stood together to defend freedom during World War II. The king reminded Congress that those shared sacrifices shaped the modern world. But his message quickly returned to the present. Today's world, he warned, feels increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. In many ways, he suggested, the current global climate appears even more unstable than the world his mother addressed in 1991. No nation, regardless of its power, can face modern threats alone. Because of that reality, democratic alliances must grow stronger rather than weaker. King Charles praised Britain's recent commitment to increasing defense spending and modernizing its military capabilities. He briefly reflected on his own years serving in the Royal Navy, proudly continuing a long family tradition of military service. Then came one of the speech's most emotional moments. The king spoke about the 25th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. His tone became deeply solemn. He described September 11th as a defining moment not only for America, but for the entire world. The pain and grief Americans experienced, he said, were felt globally. During his visit to New York, he and Queen Camilla planned to honor the victims, families, and heroes affected by the tragedy. "We stood with you then," he declared firmly, "and we stand with you now." Those words reflected the extraordinary solidarity Britain showed America after the attacks. The king recalled how NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history after September 11th, demonstrating that an attack on one ally would be treated as an attack on all. He emphasized that Britain and America have repeatedly stood shoulder to shoulder through history, from two world wars to the Cold War, Afghanistan, and other defining conflict. According to King Charles, that same determination remains necessary today. He strongly supported Ukraine and praised the courage of the Ukrainian people. He also defended NATO as a cornerstone of global security. The military cooperation between Britain and America, he explained, extends far beyond symbolism. Thousands of American service members remain stationed in Britain while British personnel continue serving across the United States. The two countries jointly produce advanced military technology, including F-35 fighter jets, while also partnering with Australia through the ambitious AUS submarine agreement. These partnerships exist not because of nostalgia, the king explained, but because shared strength protects future generations. Was King Charles's speech restricted only to security? Did he address other important issues? Let's find out. Innovation, partnership, and sustainability. After speaking about defense military cooperation and global security, King Charles shifted his attention to another powerful force that has shaped both Britain and America for generations: progress through knowledge, innovation, and economic strength. His words painted a picture of two nations that rose to greatness not only because of power, but because of the systems and values they built over centuries. The king explained that democracy, fair laws, and independent courts created the foundation that allowed both countries to flourish. These principles gave people confidence to build businesses, invent new technologies, and invest in the future without fear or instability. According to Charles, this commitment to justice and order helped transform Britain and the United States into two of the wealthiest and most influential nations the world has ever seen. But he made it clear that the partnership between the two countries is not stuck in the past. Instead, Britain and America are now working side by side to shape the future of humanity itself. He spoke passionately about growing cooperation in areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, nuclear fusion, advanced medical discoveries, and scientific research. These developments, he said, are more than scientific achievements. They carry the power to cure diseases, solve major global challenges, improve human life, and potentially save millions of people in the years ahead. King Charles also highlighted the enormous economic bond shared by the two nations. Every year, hundreds of billions of dollars move between Britain and America through trade, while trillions more are invested into each other's economies. This relationship supports countless companies, industries, and millions of workers on both sides of the Atlantic. Yet, the king stressed that their connection cannot be measured only in money. The true strength of the relationship, he suggested, lies in people, culture, education, and shared experiences. He praised programs like the Marshall Scholarship, which has given thousands of American students the chance to study in Britain. These exchanges, he explained, create understanding between future leaders and build friendships that strengthen the bond between nations for generations. Then, the tone of the speech became more emotional and urgent as King Charles turned to one of the causes closest to his heart, protecting the environment. Long before climate change became a worldwide political issue, Charles had already been warning about humanity's destruction of nature. Standing before Congress as king, he renewed that warning with even greater intensity. He described nature as humanity's greatest treasure, something priceless that can never truly be replaced once destroyed. Using powerful imagery, he reminded listeners that Scotland's mountains and America's Appalachian Mountains were once physically connected millions of years ago. The comparison served as a beautiful symbol of the deep historical bond between the two nations. But behind the beauty of his words came a serious warning. Humanity, he said, is dangerously close to damaging the natural systems that support life itself. If nature continues to collapse, the consequences will reach far beyond wildlife and scenery, threatening food supplies, economies, security, and even human survival. What was King Charles's parting word for the American Congress? How did the atmosphere feel after his speech? Let's delve into the details of King Charles's final message that echoed across the world. Unity, responsibility, legacy. As the speech approached its conclusion, King Charles reflected once more on the extraordinary journey between Britain and America. From bitter enemies during the American Revolution to trusted allies on the global stage, the two nations achieved one of history's most remarkable reconciliations. That transformation, he suggested, should inspire hope for the future. If former enemies could build such a powerful alliance, perhaps divided nations today can also find paths toward peace. The king prayed that Britain and America would continue defending democracy, liberty, and human dignity alongside allies across Europe, the Commonwealth, and the wider world. At the same time, he warned against becoming too inward-looking. No country, he implied, can isolate itself from global responsibility. The challenges facing humanity, war, extremism, climate change, economic instability, technological disruption, and social division require cooperation on an international scale. Then came the speech's final and perhaps most powerful moment. Quoting President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, King Charles reminded the audience that actions matter more than speeches. "The world may little note what we say," Lincoln once declared, "but it can never forget what we do." The king used that quote to challenge both Britain and America. As the United States approaches its 250th anniversary, both nations must recommit themselves not only to serving their own citizens, but also to protecting humanity's future. His final words echoed powerfully through the chamber. "God bless the United States, and God bless the United Kingdom." The room exploded into applause. Lawmakers from opposing political parties rose to their feet together. For a brief moment, political differences disappeared. Republicans and Democrats, diplomats, military leaders, and monarchists all stood united in recognition of the historic moment they had just witnessed. The speech accomplished far more than celebrating friendship between two nations. It warned against division. It defended democracy. It honored sacrifice. It promoted faith, compassion, and peace. It encouraged cooperation in a dangerous world. Most importantly, it reminded millions of people that even in times of uncertainty, unity remains possible. As the chamber slowly emptied and the joint session came to an end, one truth remained undeniable. King Charles III had not simply delivered a ceremonial address. He had delivered a message meant for the entire world. So what do you think about King Charles's speech? Do you also believe that it inspired and impressed the American Congress? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.